Bill.
Okay. So this week is sponsored by Neil Tobias. Thank you,
In
Neil.
honor of Rabbi Joseph Beyda.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the
And
honor.
family.
Thank you. Okay, so okay, so we're going to talk about a couple of different things. Basically, we've been talking about electricity on Shabbat. We're going to talk about movement on Shabbat, and we'll get to the elevator, the escalator, a car, and maybe even the subway. So let's talk about all of those different things. Okay, so ma'alit, an elevator. Asur l'shtamesh b'ma'alit regila b'Shabbat, משום שפתיחת דלתות המעלית וסגירתם והפעלת המעלית כרוכות בחיבור וניתוק מעגלים חשמליים. He says, in general, you're not allowed to use an elevator on Shabbat because when you open the door, when you close it, when you press buttons and things like that, all sorts of electric things start happening as a result of you doing your actions. Says plus when you press the buttons, often you're going to be turning on lights or of some sort or another, and then you'd be violating the melacha, which we call mav'ir, which is lighting a fire. So for that reason, using a normal elevator is not allowed on Shabbat. So he says now, yesh lahatir l'shtamesh b'Shabbat b'ma'alit automatit. He says you're allowed to use an automatic elevator, what we like to call a Shabbat elevator. Dahainu shehi ola v'yoredet leitim mizumanot or ole v'yoredet lo hefsek. He says either it's on a timer of some sort or it just goes up and down nonstop. The door opens and closes on its own. You don't have to do anything in order to make it happen. And no work, meaning Shabbat work, melacha, needs to be done either getting in or getting out of the elevator. He says, and it's for sure, if you add into this, that you're riding the elevator for some version of a mitzvah. Right? Like you're going to pray in the Bet Knesset, or you're going to eat a Shabbat meal by someone. Or if you're dealing with a person that is unable to climb steps, elderly, infirmed, or something like that. He says there is a very famous opinion that you're only allowed to go up in a Shabbat elevator, but not go down in a Shabbat elevator. This is the opinion of Rav Eliashiv and some other opinions, but we don't hold by that opinion. We hold that you could go up or down in a Shabbat elevator. So in many places where Jewish people live or frequent on Shabbat that have elevators, there will often be what they call a Shabbat elevator. So if a person has the option of taking the Shabbat elevator as opposed to some other things, which we'll talk about, so that is for sure the better option because the person is not doing anything. He's not changing anything. He's not making anything happen. And that definitely can be helpful for people that live on high floors and things like that. And certainly in the city, in Florida, in hotels, this comes in handy a lot. Okay. מעלית אוטומטית שתעלותיהן נפתחות באופן אוטומטי כשנעצרת ונסגרות מהן כעבור זמן קצוב, אסור לגעת בתעלותיה בידו או בגופו כשהן הולכות ונסגרות. He says, if you're in an automatic elevator, what we call the Shabbat elevator, you can't touch the doors, right? You can't make them open or close or something like that. And that, because that creates all sorts of electrical things happening. He says, אסור לעבור לפני תא פוטו-אלקטרי, הואיל וגורם לדלתות להתפתח, ובעזיבתו את מקומו גורם הוא לדלתות להיסגר. And as he said already, you don't want to be walking past electric sensors that create, make things happen, opening doors, closing doors, and so on and so forth, which can be problematic. So a lot of the Shabbat elevators shut off those sensors. Certainly the ones in Israel, I know, do that. Okay, so that's all he has to say about an elevator. He lives in Israel, so it's easy for him to stop with that. In Israel, most of the places where Orthodox Jewish people live, and even places where not so many Orthodox Jewish people live, they have the Shabbat elevator, set. It's like a regular part of Israel because Israel is very Shabbat aware. But in New York, in Florida, although there are places that have it, there are plenty of places that don't, that we might be in. So what are the options? So let's talk about a couple different things. So first of all, one option would be for a non-Jewish person. Now, remember to press the buttons. Now, the truth is that you have to divide that up into two categories as well, which is non-Jewish person who is doing it anyway, and non-Jewish person who's doing it for you, right? So non-Jewish person who's doing it anyway is, I have a neighbor on the same floor that I live in. So he presses this, he goes to all the same buttons, he presses all the same things. He's not doing anything different because I'm there, right? So that is really, it's hard to find a problem with that. That's no problem. He's going in the elevator anyway. He's going out of the elevator anyway. He's pressing the same buttons, the same floors, whether you were there or not. You're not really impacting anything. So in that instance, it also is not a problem. However, most instances are not going to be that way, right? So, we're talking about, I live on the 29th floor, and I want to go to shul, and steps, that's a lot of steps, right? To take up or the down or up, either way is a lot of steps. So what do we say about this? So if a person has a non-Jewish worker, right? So, like a housekeeper or something like that, you can advise the housekeeper to make it the person's business to spend time at that time that you need the elevator. Meaning you can say, housekeeper, do me a favor, go get the newspaper from downstairs, right? And so the housekeeper is going down the elevator for her purpose, not or his purpose, not your purpose, right? Because he could take the steps, but he's choosing to take the elevator. So that would be no problem. But even that sometimes is very challenging to orchestrate and arrange. And so, really a person has to ask themselves, how challenging is the situation that they're in, right? If you're on the 3rd, 4th, 5th floor, so perhaps better take the steps if you're physically able to. But if you're on the 10th, 15th, 20th, 30th floor, right, it's already, that's a lot to ask. We would say, look, if you have no other option, then letting the non-Jew do it is fine. I would say the non-Jew should do it in a way that is not direct, right? Which is let the non-Jew use, teach the non-Jew to use an elbow or something of that nature, because it does create a second d'Rabbanan. So it's, when we have two d'Rabbanan, we've said, if it's for mitzvah, it makes it more allowed. So the first d'Rabbanan is that you're telling the non-Jew. The second d'Rabbanan is the non-Jew is doing it in an unusual style, using the elbow or something like that. So if you don't have the opportunity to have the non-Jew do it for the non-Jew's purpose, the non-Jew's doing it for you, you can ask the non-Jew to do it indirectly, and that helps a little bit. Okay, now, what if you're in a situation where you don't even have that, right? Which there's a lot of situations where you may not have a non-Jew, right? I've seen plenty of situations, when you're at a hotel, you don't usually have a housekeeper or someone with you, and you could be on the 25th, 35th floor or something like that. Or it's your own apartment in Florida, but your housekeeper or someone is not there that Shabbat or whatever it may be. There's lots of possibilities where this could come into play. So the first thing is, again, go back to weighing, can you take the steps or not, right? And again, 4 or 5 flights is not really too burdensome for most people. But certainly, just they're not only people that are sick or anything like that, even that is too much to ask for. So I would say the same would apply, which is to do some kind of indirect touching yourself. So if you don't have, that's plan, I don't know what letter we're up to, but that's plan D or E, as opposed to plan B, is if a person has no other option and the person is stuck, then to use the indirect, that would be the next thing to do.
Rabbi?
Yeah, the question, Ezra?
Yeah, some buildings in Florida, like Trump, I know has a fob. And so you have to use the fob to like rub it against the magnetic pad, and then it takes you up to your room. So like, I don't know if you could, it's
Right.
just a different dynamic. It's just a different.
So this is a new thing that I know a lot of elevators have now. Also in hotels, you have to put the key up against the thing. I mean, they've made it harder to just use your elbow. So I would say the same thing about that item, right? Can you do that in an indirect way, right? Can you, maybe attach it to your belt and then rub the side against the thing, or to your shirt, again, as much indirect as you can do. If you can't do indirect, so now also, I would say as much indirect as you could do as possible. And that's the, after that, really, there's not much else you could do. So those are the options for an elevator. Then it's not, you don't want to be getting to the situation where you directly press the button. That already it's just not allowed on Shabbat, and you have to find other options.
Rabbi, suppose you want to go to shul and you're at the 28th floor. To make a mitzvah to go to shul, but then you have to use
all this is assuming, right? All this is assuming I'm doing this for a good purpose, right? Meaning I'm not going to go to the club. I'm doing this. The nightclub I'm talking about. And I'm doing this to do some Shabbat purpose. So now there's lots of positive Shabbat purposes. Certainly shul, certainly eating, but I would put in to go for a walk, to sit outside. All those are legitimate Shabbat nice purposes. You still don't want to be directly pressing the button. You want to do some kind of indirect if there's no other option. Again, best option is automatic. Second best, the Shabbat elevator. Second best option is, I'm sorry, someone said something, but I didn't hear.
No, I didn't know. I didn't realize you weren't finished. Continue. Now, you mentioned the key before, the hotel key, so I just wanted if you could discuss that after.
So I'm going to go through all the things. Best option is Shabbat elevator. Best option is don't take the elevator at all, but okay, assuming we need an elevator, which usually when it's there, we're going to need it. So best option, Shabbat elevator. Second best option is non-Jew with indirect. Third option is non-Jew direct. Fourth, now, by the way, I forgot. Second option is non-Jew for himself or herself, and you're joining on. Third option is non-Jew for you, indirect. Fourth option is non-Jew direct, because, whatever, you can't, the non-Jew either can't or doesn't or won't, or you can't explain it or doesn't have the patience for it or whatever. Fifth option is you, indirect. And indirect means all the different things that we said. So you really don't want to be in a situation where you get past all those options. However, so if you're in a situation where there's no other option but to be some version of direct. So what are you going to do? You're stuck, and you're stuck. But you want to try and plan around it as best you can. It's a question as to we're going to go into this tomorrow. Is using the elevator? Is it a deoraita? Is it a derabanan? And so on and so forth. We're going to get into it, but it seems like at least according to some people, it's Deoraita. So we have to be careful about using the elevator. Now, what about the escalator, right? The escalator is very different, right? The escalator is pretty much running on its own. You don't really do anything. So he says like this, Madregot na'ot asher matchilot lanoa barega sheregel adam dorchot alehem, o besamuch lahen, asur la'alot v'la'redet bahen. אולם מדרגות נאות הפועלות באופן אוטומטי, דהיינו שהן נאות לעתים מזומנות, או לא להפסק, מותר לעלות ולרדת. If the escalator works automatically, right, it runs on its own, as most escalators do, so there's no problem in riding an escalator. You don't even have to worry about, hey, how does that look, right? Does it look like you're doing something that's not allowed on Shabbat? It's not a problem because most people know that using an escalator, it's automatic, and therefore it's not a problem on Shabbat. So an escalator is not a big deal. So this leads me to the next thing, which is a car, right? Nahag hanosea berechev bayom Shabbat v'sho'el et ha'ovrim v'shavim et haderech la'agia lamakom yehudo asur lahorot lo et haderech. He says, so he starts with an interesting halacha, which is, if there's a guy who's Jewish, obviously, he's obviously Jewish, and he's driving on Shabbat, and he asks you how to get to where he wants to go to. So he says you shouldn't tell him. You shouldn't even help the guy out because you shouldn't be able to help it. He says, he says, if you tell him how to get to where he has to get to, you're going to save him driving on Shabbat. He says, doesn't matter. You can't help a Jewish person drive on Shabbat. He says, Nachon ma'od imana b'Shabbat machatziat kvish b'sha'ah sherechem noseh krav holech, כיוון שאז נאלץ הנהג להאט את מהירות ושוב אחר כך להגבירה, וכל זה נגרם בגלל חציית הכביש. He says, you shouldn't, if it's a Jewish people driving the car, you shouldn't cross the street in front of them so that they have to stop and then restart and whatever. Okay, again, you shouldn't impact the person's driving. Okay, obviously what he doesn't say is you shouldn't drive on Shabbat. Okay, I think everyone knew that. Now, what about, as we said, some things that are automatic, right? Like a subway, a shuttle bus, a bus that's, a public bus, a city bus that's going anyway. So the first answer is, in general, no, we should not use any of these things. Number one, because there's probably some version of how it looks on Shabbat. However, all that said, when there are when there's a need and there are no other options. So for example, let's say someone's in the hospital in the city, and there's a value. We have to explain how it would be, but let's say there's a value to visiting that person in the hospital. So to take the subway, and this is all assuming you can prepay or something like that, but to not have to pay, if we could avoid the payment option, to take the subway so it's basically allowed. It's not significantly different than taking an escalator, because the subway, the doors open, close, this thing starts whether I'm on it or not. So I make no difference on the subway. So therefore, to ride on the subway for a proper purpose, hard to find anything wrong with it, and therefore it would be allowed. Now, once you say that, so you have to ask, why would a bus be any different? So the answer for a bus would be, most buses don't work the same way as the subway. The subway is very large. It doesn't, one person doesn't impact it one way or another. Whereas a bus, usually by me being on it, it does make a significant impact, and therefore it would be, a bus is probably going to be problematic. However, one could probably even conjure up a situation where a bus could be okay. A city bus, especially if you get on at a busy stop, it's stopping, going, they're not paying attention to you. So a city bus, the monorail, things like that. In certain situations, it might be possible to allow such things. I actually know of a particular situation where there was a town, wherever it was, it doesn't matter, where most of the people were elderly and it was hard for them to get to shul. An Orthodox rabbi actually allowed a situation where there was a bus that drove the various different elderly people, brought them to shul. They actually called it the Shabbos, for transportation purposes. And it's theoretically possible. What's going to be interesting is our cars are going to be self-driving. And how different are they going to be than what we just said? It's a great question. And we're going to see. We're going to see if, I think not going in a car is one of those things that for us is one of those, delineators. It kind of lets us know, are we keeping Shabbat or not? So that would change if we change that. So right now we're going to say that riding in a car, riding on a bus, we have to say no. In certain circumstances, not in regular circumstances, in certain circumstances, for mitzvah, for a sick person, for something like that, we do allow using the subway, ideally with prepayment. We could talk more, and we will talk more tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to try and talk about electricity as a whole, finish it up, and say the things that we have to say, and then we'll move on to another topic. So
Rabbi, the train, you have to swipe the card. You can't. Yeah. That doesn't work, right?
So it's a good question as to whether the swiping the card. What is the swiping the card? Maybe I don't need to swipe the card because let's say I could, if I know I'm going ahead of time, I could prepay. I could, have the station person open the door for me or something like that. There's ways around that. And even swiping the card, we could discuss as to whether or not it's problematic. It might not be as crazy as it sounds. Maybe even letting a non-Jew swipe the card or something like that. So there's ways around that. That's the point. The point I was really dealing with is writing on the item. I guess not that it's not that we could talk about it, but like riding the tram in Disney World, right? Not significantly different, right? Where the guy's stopping, going. There's 400 people. You get on, you get off. Doesn't really make that much of a difference, and other things like that. We could come up with a number of different cases that fit into this. Anyway, we're going to stop here because it's 8 o'clock.
Hazak Baruch. Have a good day, everyone.
Safemat.